What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, where we discuss everything in regards to men's health, physical health, penis enlargement. We leave nothing off the table when it comes to leveling up as dudes. And today's no different, as we talk a little bit more about accelerated resolution therapy with Eric Fisher. I'm your host, CJ Rodriguez. Fat loss coach is what I do. Getting people into the best possible shape of their lives is what I love doing, what I'm passionate about, and that is my profession. So if you want to learn more about that too, be sure to click a link in the description below and we'll set that up. If you're ready to get rid of the big old belly and the gelatinous titties for summer and get in good shape, man, be sure to get at me. Now, let's get back to today's topic. And this is something that I think is extremely relevant, especially in this day and age where we see a lot of madness. Like, we see a lot of things when it comes to young men, unfortunately, that I think isn't in our best interest, right? Whether it's young dudes, older dudes. Unfortunately, we see a lot of fucked up shit coming out when it comes to, what they say that young men should be doing or how men should be conducting themselves or toxic masculinity and all that bullshit, which I'm not a fan of, because I think as a father of two boys, I'm all about men leveling up, getting better, getting healthier, getting their mind right, leveling up physically. I know a lot of you guys coming for the male enhancement side of things too. And I think it all ties into just one of the pillars of masculinity, which is progress, right? Now, Eric Fisher is here to help us out when it comes to a little bit of trauma, right? Resolving a lot of the issues that may have occurred previous times in our lives and may be in control, unfortunately, right? And the beauty of it is that he specializes in getting people into that resolution mode a whole lot faster than just going and sitting down talking to a therapist. He discusses how the methods that he uses helps people, right, get back into the right frame of mind as soon as possible, right? Which is something that I think is crucial and something that will actually lead to people's success, because sometimes people fall off when it's like, hey, this takes too long. I've been doing XYZ for X amount of times and, I haven't seen any progress, right? But in doing it from this perspective, Eric has found that people are able to heal from their trauma a whole lot faster, which ultimately leads to them being able to go on and functioning as good, productive members of society, which is something that I think I applaud, and I think we need more of it. Because right now, suicide rates for men, unfortunately, are pretty much at an all-time high. A lot of times we hear young men just saying, they feel lost, disenfranchised, and I don't think that's right, man. I think it's all messed up in that regard, and I think it's set up that way, unfortunately. But that being said, there are ways around it. If you do want to get in contact, start working on that trauma, be sure to get at Eric Fisher. Put all the links in the description. So again, without any further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Eric Fisher, where we discuss a little bit more, or we learn about accelerated resolution therapy. All right, let's jump on in. Before we get started, one more thing. If you want to get any PE gear, be sure to check out TotalManShop.com. That is TotalManShop.com. And use the promo code MHS2020. Promo code is MHS2020. And get 12% off. Be sure to check out their wide variety of all kinds of good quality PE equipment. All right? And that's promo code MHS2020 for 12% off. And the website, once again, is TotalManShop.com. What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, where I am joined by Eric Fisher, making his way from Calgary, where it's always nice and sunny. Psych, it's not. And I know that because I live in the same country. But Eric Fisher, actually making his way from the States, living in Calgary, and is now a Canadian certified counselor with over 13 years of experience working in the US and Canada. And, talking off air a little bit, we're discussing, very, very briefly, but the importance that I think counseling is in regards to men's health, because we're seeing suicide rates really skyrocketing. We're seeing a lot of different issues come into the light, right? And I think Eric's insight is going to be pretty freaking spectacular when it comes to addressing some of these subjects, which are kind of heavy, however, need to be discussed. But first and foremost, Eric, how are you, man?
Doing splendid, man. Doing okay. How's things going your way?
Oh, doing awesome, doing awesome. And I love having these conversations because I do feel like it's one of these things that, the more we discover it, the more we discuss it, the less taboo it becomes. And the more I think guys can kind of just open up and just really let go of all this trauma and all this craziness that we've had to endure for years,
Yep.
and,
Yep.
quit doing it ourselves. But the first thing I kind of want to dig into is where did this start for you? Like, what motivated you to get into this field and really start going in this direction, I guess?
Some mental health concerns ran in a certain part of my family, and I saw that growing up a little bit. And I've read some of your journey as well, and I've been through the bullying as far as like I would even go to church and then I would get bullied like in Sunday evening,
Oh
like
God.
class before the teacher would get there. And it was like, it's supposed to be a safe place, but it was not, it's not something I wanted to get to early as far as the service. So I've always been interesting when it comes to psychology, when it comes to the human brain and behavior, and I really enjoyed psychology in high school. And I thought, well, I did a psychology bachelor's. What am I going to do now with this? And the next step was to do counseling, and so I really enjoy the work, albeit I'm an introvert, so I got to have my time for me, some self-care, whether that's exercise or whatever it is to help me just stay sane, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think that's super important. I think, especially when it comes to guys, like, I think a lot of the things that are kind of affecting us in regards to mental health is probably not having that balance. And it's kind of like you mentioned, you found your outlet, I got mine. Um, and right off the hop, what do you think is something that guys can do that, we used to like something like an old characteristic that you'd see as guys just kind of go home, drink, play video games? What would be a healthier outlet that a guy could just kind of get started off to kind of get his life headed into the right direction?
Yeah, totally. Well, like I was mentioning to you earlier before we started, I actually had this meeting with, they're actually all females, by the way, and me. So there's like five female psychologists, social workers, counselors, and myself. And we were talking, they actually asked me, well, how has your journey been, Eric? Like, what have you learned? And I think for most men, it's just understanding the concept of emotional intelligence and
Mm,
just how important that is. It doesn't involve often video games and beer.
yeah.
It often might involve kind of get in touch with nature a little bit more. Can I actually exercise since exercise can help me with emotional regulation and even helping me explore feelings. And
Hmm.
so it's really just getting curious, I would say, just getting curious about different possibilities.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things that's always, I guess I've been pretty open about this and pretty transparent. But how do you pull somebody out of their shell who's just kind of, who knows these things maybe at a superficial level, but how would you get them to start exploring that within themselves? Like, is it just kind of like, is there any exercise or something that they could start off with?
Reminds me of that movie with Robin Williams and Matt Damon, Good Will Hunting,
Oh,
where they're sitting in the office and he's not talking and he's just sitting there, right? And
yeah.
I've had a few of those sessions where, maybe the gentleman wasn't ready to talk. Say, okay, cool, I'll meet you where you're at. And you know what? I usually would just start asking questions about what they enjoy, their leisure activities, or what they used to do in the past. And that definitely starts to get the ball rolling if they're kind of, scrunched up and I don't want to talk about this. So I'll just ask some open-ended questions like what do you enjoy doing? Like what gives you spark? What are you curious about? What's fun for you? And that usually gets people, especially men, women, well, some women can be the same, but a lot of women are just ready to talk about those things, usually. Of course, there's a lot of different layers. So
Yeah.
that's the quick yeah, that'll be the quick answer to that question as far as just asking those open-ended questions and just meeting someone where they're at and joining with them where they're at, and that's okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Cause you're right. Yeah, I guess everybody's in a different stage in life. And I guess for you, from your perspective, it's almost like, okay, I got to handle it accordingly. You can't really go
That's
in guns
right.
blazing.
That's right. Yeah, because I mean, I have the guns blazing and they have the shield up and it's ricocheting off those bullets, and I'm just like, all right, we're gonna do this maybe a different way.
Yeah, no, that sounds like it'd be awful. And I guess with years, I mean, you obviously have developed kind of a, I guess that experience and that, the rapport kind of comes over time and all that, which makes perfect sense. The one thing that I did, I had here that I want to dive into because I find this very, very interesting. Accelerated resolution therapy. What is that?
Hmm. Accelerated resolution therapy. Where do I begin? I'll give you a little brief recap of the therapy. So Lainey Rosenzweig, she's down in the States. She was getting trained in another treatment called EMDR, and she realized, you know what, there's a different way to do this type of treatment. I'm going to create my own therapy, basically. And she actually wrote a book recently called Too Good to Be True. And in fact, this therapy is too good to be true because of just the amazing transformations I've seen with folks, men and women. So what it does is ART changes negative images to positive images in the brain. It's called positization. And so let's say there's a traumatic memory. I'll give you an example of a real case. So a woman, she was raped and then the man left the house. And so in her ART session, she was able to actually conjure up for herself a new memory to put in front of the original memory. And so when she looks back, that's what she sees more. So it's really hard to go back to the original if it's solidified. So what she did in her modified memory was she kicked the guy between the legs, punched him, threw him into a TV, and got in a sports car and drove away and gave her more empowerment. It was more relief for her, more positive. And now when she looks back, that's what she has. And so
Interesting.
I've seen, men come to tears with just seeing something different for the first time in such a long time, you know, for both men and women. And it's really powerful to see men do that because of the vulnerability that's there.
Yeah.
And so it uses a lot of rescripting, guided imagery, cognitive behavioral therapy on steroids, so to speak.
Huh.
So changing thought processes on a very deep level, Gestalt therapy, which we don't have to get into, but it's bringing in younger versions of yourself into this therapy. Yeah, it's keep the knowledge but lose the pain is the tagline of the therapy.
Interesting. So it's almost like a multi-angled approach that you have towards a traumatic situation to kind of reframe it or reshape it in the mind.
That's right, reframe and reshape. A very good way of that's a very good way of describing what's happening.
That sounds very, very, I mean, now you got me thinking a million different, my mind just went in a million different directions, but it's like, what else could you do with that? Because you could probably, I mean, when it comes to visualization and that, even though that's in the future, could you use this technology as well to kind of like, let's say if you're playing a basketball game or something, you want to visualize yourself, it's almost like create memories ahead of time. It's like when it comes to visualization and that, because I've always looked into like sports science, they talk about the mind and development and that from that, in that respect, right? So would
Totally.
that be possible?
Yep, CJ would. So what the therapy does is called three prongs. So it does past, present, future all in one therapy session. So take care of the memory in one session, present sensations, and also what we call target trigger times, which is also about future triggers or future scenarios that I want to desensitize
Interesting.
myself to. So for a basketball game or meeting up with somebody that I have to do boundaries with, or let's say I come into a situation that used to be a traumatic response for me, we can desensitize that as well. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, interesting. So, hold on. Now, I got to go back like past, present, future. When it comes to the present, then how do you deal with that? Is it more like a mindfulness approach where it just kind of like feel all the sensations and just kind of like let it obviously kind of be within you and then let it go? Like, how does that process kind of look like?
Yeah, it's like a mindfulness based approach. So what's happening is we're desensitizing, we're working on processing sensations in the here and now in a
Mhm.
mindful way, using eye movements, bilateral stimulation.
What?
Yeah. So that's actually what's happening in the therapy is we're doing eye movements, which if you ask somebody, there's lots of theories as to why the eye movements work, but we actually don't know why. There's not like a one clear-cut reason why in the research yet. So it's like, when you're asleep, it's like REM, but you're
Yeah.
awake. Like the eyes are moving when you're asleep, you're doing that when you're awake, and you're getting to that place at a deep level. So yeah, so we're dealing with the sensations as you're going through the memory. That's what we're working on.
Interesting, because it's kind of like, well, yeah, obviously you got to feel something, you know,
Oh yeah.
in
Oh
every
yeah.
situation of life. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
like you can be completely desensitized to it. Obviously, after you do the work, I guess that makes sense. Where it's kind of like, okay, you can look at it from a more of a neutral perspective. But and I wanted to ask you too, what's your theory on to as to why it works with the eye movement? Just out of curiosity's sake, like what's your take on it?
My take on it is, CJ, that it's stimulating that bilateral stimulation, which when people say, hey, sleep on it and you know what to do in the morning,
Hmm.
that's my idea of what's going on. Being able to get
Oh,
to, it's being able to process things like we would do when we're asleep in REM and being able to register through things. Um, that's the best I can give you. I'm not really sure what I even think about it completely, but if I had to give you a piece of it, that would be what I would think.
well,
Yeah.
no, it makes sense because it's kind
Yeah.
of. I mean, I've heard different theories and stuff. It's kind of like, wow, gosh, there was somebody who was talking about. I think it was Andrew Huberman, where he's like, if you move your eyes laterally in a stressful situation, it creates kind of like the mind, the mindset, or I guess it kind of relaxes the mind, and it's like almost like you're walking. Therefore, it's like has a calming effect, right? And I kind of
Yes.
find it strange that I'm like, why do my eyes have a connection to how I feel? You know?
Exactly. Like, how does that work, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it is a calming effect, and that's the reason for those eye movements. And I've seen people very tense because they have to go through the memory by itself at the beginning of this procedure. And yeah, as you can tell, it can be very like tense and upsetting and difficult. Yet there's a time where they start to desensitize, and I think you used the word neutral a moment ago.
Yeah.
That's what the memory becomes to be. It's like it's in the past where it belongs. So
Interesting. And
yeah.
even though you've imprinted the new memory, which kind of, I guess, the way I kind of see it, it's almost like a filter, almost, right? Because it's kind of like it happened. However, it's almost like you reframed it. What happens with the old memory then?
Stays there, however, it's very much sensitized. It's a very objective viewpoint at this point. It's like it's like I can look back and I know that that happened, and it's very much lost its traumatic flavor. There's
Mhm.
not those symptoms of trauma anymore. It's basically something that happened, and that's
Yeah.
all. And then this we call it the director's scene. We get to bring in this scene or memory, same thing in this therapy, just different words. This new scene is what
Interesting.
someone would come to more so. And there's a fear of change script. There's a dyslexia script. There's pain management script. There's just basic trauma script. So there's lots of different issues that it can be used for. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, it's almost because the way I kind of like, I'm filtering this in my own mind, and I almost feel like it changes the trajectory of that person's life now. Because for so long, it's almost like those emotions were attached to that negative memory. And now that you've kind of switched things up, it's almost like maybe they were going this way, and now it's like, well, you can go that way now.
It's
It's almost
like
like
totally.
you can
It's like,
totally switch sides.
yeah, like I'm going on this pathway through the forest, and now there's this other pathway through the forest that I can go. Yeah.
Yeah, which kind of, I guess, would do you think that that would create new neural pathways in the brain because of it? Because it's new memory now says, hey, you don't have to go through this hard road and try to figure things out. It's like now you got this other route. It's a better alternate route.
Leads to empowerment, leads to a different sense of perhaps even my self-identity, can lead to, yeah, changes in cognition as far as how I see myself. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. And the other thing I was going to ask, like, what are some of your favorite stories that you have in regards to people that have done this therapy and you kind of saw them going down that road and now that they've switched up? What did that look like for some of the people that work with you?
It's 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 interesting. It's like a soup, with all these different ingredients, and it's hard to pick out just a little bit of the soup for a particular case. I can remember the first time when I worked in this inpatient treatment facility and did this therapy with a young lady, and I remember her telling me something on the lines of, I didn't think I would be able to see this a different way, and she was tearing up. And
Wow.
so I can tell you that for most people, there's these tears of joy, there's these tears of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one person telling me that, so there's a metaphorical piece with a bridge, and on the other side of the bridge, she was able to see God, and that was really big for her. Or for other people, they see people that they've lost to death on the other side of the bridge waiting for them. Or so there's this sense of connection with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the cases, the people that I walk with that go through this. Yeah.
Interesting. The reason why, I bring this up is just, so many people are suffering from depression, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Have you ever worked with somebody that's been suffering with depression? Then all of a sudden it's like they just out of the funk, like,
Yep. Yep. There's a gentleman, a young man that came to see me through his EAP, and he only had 3 sessions with me. So I had to really get on the ball and like, what am I going to do with this gentleman? I got 3 sessions. Let's cure him in 3, right? That usually doesn't happen. And so I did this survey with him with his consent, and he went through a certain protocol with ART, and he was actually able to, through the session, get to a place where the depression didn't have a hold on him anymore. Like he had all these self-defeating thoughts, and we could see as he went through that those core beliefs that used to plague him, he had these reframes, as you mentioned a moment ago,
mhm.
these reframes of what he was experiencing. And at the end of the session, he's like, "Wow, I don't know what to say. Yeah, thanks." But I tell folks, you did all the work yourself. Like I'm waving my hand around, wagging my hand around. I'm going on a script. I'm helping empower and guide you. However, you're doing all the work internally. The brain wants to heal, just like a bullet in the wound. The bullet wants to come out, you know, so the
Interesting.
wound can heal. Yeah. So that's one case with the depression that I can think of.
Interesting. So, because I mean, when it comes to depression, it almost seems like, and the reason why I bring this up is that there's clients that I work with as well, but it's more for fitness and coaching and all that kind of good stuff. Getting people into good shape.
Yeah.
However, the mind kind of always plays into it. And there's one guy that I work with, and he tells me, he's like, "Yo," he's like, "mentally, man, I'm just not feeling it." He's like, "I got depression, I got anxiety," and I mean, I do feel like some of it's self-diagnosed because he's kind of a younger kid, and he's just like,
Mhm.
"I got it all." I'm like, I don't know how much of it is true or not true. However, I do feel that when it comes to depression, a lot of it is based off of past trauma, right? And would I be
Yeah.
correct in having that belief, or are there other causes too that contribute to that?
For depression, yeah, depression can be a big one because if I've been through trauma, then I'm depressed because of how trauma is impacting my life
Hmm.
socially, psychologically, spiritually, etc. Is there other reasons for depression and anxiety? I mean, there could be medical conditions that contribute to having depression or anxiety, and so that has to be ruled out that no general medical conditions are influencing
Hmm.
these type of mental health concerns. Let's see, ADHD can lead to a lot of different mental health concerns like depression and anxiety, and especially substance use. I think people with ADHD are 6 times more likely to have substance use concerns.
Why is that?
The frontal lobe, the
Hmm.
governor of the brain, is not working adequately. So impulse control, being able to make uh, decisions that benefit me. Impulsivity is very much rampant. Motivation is decreased as well with ADHD. And so, because of that, there's a more likelihood I want to seek out substances because I want to find some type of relief. And then
Hmm.
I can't put the brakes on saying no to those substances like nicotine, which elevates dopamine, which people with ADHD are low in. So,
Hmm.
uh,
Interesting.
yeah,
So it's almost a coping mechanism, but there's something behind it. Because, I mean, the people that I can think of that had ADHD and probably legit ADHD are big time potheads that I know, right? And I'm like, they always reach for the weed, and he's like, "No, bro, like I need this." I'm like, "Do you really?" And he's like, "No, man, I do need it." I'm like, "All right, whatever." Right? He's always, it never bothered me, and I'm like, when it comes to weed here in Vancouver, it was never a big deal, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
and he'd be like, "Yo, you don't want to smoke?" I'm like, "No, man, I don't feel the need for it the way you do." But it kind of makes sense that there's an actual like scientific reason as to why he probably feels like he needs that hit chemically, right?
Yep. The chill, weed as far as bringing someone down, or pulling them back, putting on the
Mhm.
brakes. They can, yeah, chill, relax more. Yeah. I mean, does he need it in the way he does, but is there other ways to do that? Yes, there is. Like stimulant medications or non-stimulant medications. So,
Yeah.
but it's just yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, I think we all have different coping mechanisms, right? So whether it's ADD, ADHD, or depression, anxiety, whatever the case may be, it seems like everybody has a different way to kind of self-soothe. What are some of the other popular things that you see that just amongst the male population tend to be the most prevalent?
Are you, as far as mental health concerns, I would say that existential anxiety is a big one. Like working with a gentleman from Europe, and workaholism was probably was a big piece. And I think workaholism for a lot of men is big. And
Interesting.
so there's that, which kind of goes into addiction, but there's also, yeah, just depression and anxiety around purpose and meaning.
Hmm.
Like my dad once told me this quote from, I think it was Henry David Thoreau, that most men lived lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, you're like you get it, eh? Like smiling, and so that's something I see a lot with the men is this. A lot of them have kids. They're at a certain place in their life, and they're like, I want something more. Or where's the meaning at with what I'm doing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, because I could totally, I mean, oh gosh, like my 9 to 5, I absolutely hate it, and I find it deplorable.
Yep.
However, I just
Yep.
do it because, I got to get paid, and that's kind of why I go there. And,
Sure.
luckily I'm transitioning into my coaching full time. And I mean, to your point, it's something that gives me meaning and it makes me happy, to my core, where it's just like, I get to see people really progress. I get to help out. And I think it's more fulfilling when you do something that you're passionate about, but you're making a bigger impact into the population, into like, the world as a whole, right? As corny as it might sound, it does kind of give you that meaning where it kind of sparks your creativity, it sparks your interest, and really like from an energetic perspective too. It just, I don't know, it's like it becomes a passion project, but it's like now what you do for a living, which is awesome, right? And that combination, that intersect is what really helps people to I think, be happy in this life. How do you go about counseling guys who may not know what that is, or really know what they're passionate, like truly passionate about, and really helping them find their purpose?
We like to we I'll use the word I I like to use a core values assessment. Like, what are the values that are there? Are there some values that maybe you want to tap into more, for this person? And I think that's a really big portion to look at because most men, they have values, but they don't, maybe they, and this is men and women, but humans, we have values, but oftentimes we're not maybe in line where we'd like to be with our life spiritually or with the work or life play. And it's just being able to revisit that, you
Mhm.
know. And sometimes even attachment style can be a concern because if I have an avoidant attachment style, then I really can't seek those meaningful relationships. It's just a lot more difficult to connect with people on a vulnerable level because I'm more avoidant. So that can be worked on as well.
Mhm.
So those are two big pieces to look at is values, attachment style. And I would say a third one would be generally asking about what does meaning look like for you right now?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
make sense because it's kind of, you got to start off with that.
Yeah, that needs to be a building block, How much grit do you have? Like intersection between perseverance and passion.
Yeah.
Like how much grit? And sometimes
Yeah.
it's not a lot. Yeah,
Hmm, that's interesting. Food for thought, because I guess you really do have to evaluate who you are as a person and kind of look into what is it that lights you up, what is it that you're passionate about. And
that's
until
right.
you really know these things, I guess it's kind of like, well, we got to give you purpose, but I have absolutely no idea what you like.
Yeah. So what do you like, or what did you used to like? Like for me, I was a closet introvert for such the longest time. Like I interned with I interned with the FBI when I was in graduate
Wow.
school. And I was a hobnobber, I was talking with all these people and everyone saw me doing that. Yet I came to find years later that that wasn't like my true self. Like
Mhm.
I'm not an extrovert. I think that's if there was any that generally eroded over time anyway. So I had to find out meaning when it came to being introverted and where could I gain meaning with being introverted. and that can come with the work here, connections outside of the work. Yeah.
No, yeah, because you have to do something that kind of lines up with your personality. You know, like I kind of feel like sometimes it's almost like we're going against the current when we're trying to define ourselves as people that we're not just to make a buck, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, we're in the current and we're swimming around, maybe aimless for a little while, and it's just all for the dough, perhaps all for the money. But
Yeah. And
yeah.
do you think that's kind of where imposter syndrome comes in for a lot of people, where it's just kind of like, oh, I'm
Mm.
doing this thing, but I don't, I just feel like it's an empty shell, or it's almost like some people are just, wearing that mask all their lives?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on imposter syndrome, but I would say that, yeah, totally, CJ, like what you hit on there as far as I'm not, I'm wearing this mask that's not my authentic self. I'm not living up to my fullest potential. And this false self, this mask is just, it's just not serving me. I'm
Hmm.
serving it, but it's not serving me.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of like the public perception of who you are isn't really who you are.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's that cognitive dissonance, there's that
Dissonance.
disconnect
Yeah.
between, okay, well, I'm giving this to the outside world, but on the inside, this is who I actually feel like I am.
Hmm.
I have to work on emotional sobriety, not allowing other people to edit my reality of who I am.
Yeah. Because, well, that comes back to the extrinsic influences. It's like, it's not who I am, but I'm going to pretend to be this way for whatever reason.
Yeah, whether that's my family or society or yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
And the other question that I had for you, you mentioned the core values before. What do those core values look like?
Community, acceptance, perseverance, honesty, courage, brevity, connection, spirituality. There's a host of different ones
Hmm.
that are both more socially based, some psychological, some more spiritual. It's what nourishes me.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting. And
yeah.
I mean, this is a question, I guess it's kind of, I mean, it's an open ended question, but it's one that, I think about a lot because I've heard about it discussed more and more. But as we see religion kind of fade away, and spirituality kind of go into a whole bunch of different directions, do you think that's good or bad for society?
I can see how it can be a good thing. I've heard it
Mhm.
said religion is for those that want to go to heaven, spirituality is for those that have already been to hell. So, I mean, it can be seen as a good thing as far as not being encapsulated by the rituals, the texts, the different dogmatic perceptions. It's not as freeing as spirituality, being more all-encompassing.
Hmm.
If we can have the perception that religion can fit into spirituality, then we can keep both.
Hmm.
However, I think it gets to be a concern it's, when I'm trying to lord religion over somebody else or
Gotcha. Yeah.
manipulate them. So I can see how that could be bad. As far as spirituality being like it's going worse because we're looking at spirituality more, I don't really see a lot of
Hmm.
concerns really, since I consider myself a spiritual person. I have my faith of
Yeah.
Christianity. At the same time, also enjoy nature and, you know, just being outside the outdoors, and they can both coexist.
100%. Yeah. Cause I think there's nothing more spiritual than like God. It's kind of,
Well, yeah,
you
yeah.
know and I've heard it described too, like the Bible is one of the most paranormal books out there. And it's kind of because when you start to peel back the layers, I think, because I've heard of the discussion, and for me it's kind of like I think I kind of feel like faith is one of those things that's always, I mean, in the same way that we are all unique, it's almost like your interpretation of what faith really means and spirituality is always going to be unique to you, the person, right? So that's kind of
That's right.
where, that's kind of like my thoughts and my philosophical approach to it now, right? And that's kind of how I made it make sense for me. However, I do feel like some people, and that's kind of where I see like society kind of like fighting over nonsense, in regards to that.
Yep, yep.
But I wanted to ask you now, like in your practice, do you ever try to implement some type of spiritual or like maybe not like try to impose anything, but ever ask some of your clients to, hey, have you ever thought of like exploring, the spiritual side of things, or, a religion-based side of things, just because that it could possibly have some good side effects for certain people that kind of do decide to explore that a little bit more.
On the assessment, it'll be asked usually, do you have any spiritual beliefs or any concept of spirituality? Sometimes it's nope. It's like, okay, moving on. And then that might come up later on during the sessions, like you said, it's very unique to each person. I
Mhm.
often will speak with people about what's nourishing and what's poisonous to them, such as toxic people without boundaries, poisonous.
Yeah.
Boundaries are very nourishing, which can be part of spirituality as far as connections go,
Mhm.
especially for myself. And so, yeah, we'll talk about does music or art or traveling or different passions, different hobbies, or those spiritual pieces for you, nature, so
Interesting.
that's one way to go about it.
Well, you mentioned nature, and for me, nature, there's nothing more spiritual than just being in it.
Man, amen to that. Amen to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a way, it's something I think that we have to look at a lot more. Ecotherapy,
Mhm.
grounding. I mean, there's just something magical and healing about the sensory experience with being out in nature.
Yeah, the frequencies, the
Yeah.
vibration. I mean, for me, it's kind of like, yo, you want to see God's handiwork, go get lost in the forest. And you're like, oh, wow.
Look at that tree. That tree's massive, man.
Yeah, it's like, how
No.
did that happen? And it's kind of, there's something to that where it's kind of, I believe it's the Japanese who did implement that as part of like one of their healing protocols. Was like, hey, man, feeling down, go for a walk in the forest, come back.
That's right. That's right. The forest bathing aspect. Yes. I mean, it's so invigorating. And whether it's me biking in what's called Fish Creek Park or
Nice.
actually being out hiking, and maybe there's a bear that was nearby a moment ago that someone told me about on the trail. I'm like, oh no, what's going to happen here? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just yeah, it's great. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. And the other thing, I mean, as you mentioned before, which I think is something that definitely needs to be discussed. However, it's something that sometimes we all fail at, because we're trying to make everybody happy again, like we alluded to earlier in regards to like, I'm basically wearing this mask all day at work, but I want to make sure I'm politically correct and this, that, and the other. But you mentioned boundaries. How would you go about setting and perfecting somebody's boundaries in regards to that unique person?
Mm. We can take even work as an example. We'll pick on lawyers since everybody likes to pick on lawyers' eggs. Um, time boundaries can be one way to look at it. I'm going to shut off my phone at 6:30 as far as work calls or text.
Hmm.
So there's that unless it's an emergency. There's also physical boundaries maybe with certain people in my life. I mean, I guess we could look at the concept of work, coworkers. Maybe there's
Hmm.
one that maybe it's a little bit of a toxic relationship where they encroach my boundaries. Well, I need to have physical boundaries with them. Emotional boundaries could mean I don't want to speak about this particular topic at this particular time with this particular person because it's just going to lead to mm, more insult and injury than actual healing in the
Hmm.
relationship. There's also spiritual boundaries. So that could be, some people try to push, I guess it could be called religious boundaries too. People want to
Yeah.
push their beliefs on me. It's like, well, thank you for sharing, but this is where I'm at right now. Intellectual boundaries, someone trying to push what they think about something on me. There's obviously sexual boundaries for
Hmm.
sure. What's safe, what's permissible in the bedroom. There's there's material boundaries too, like if you had your man purse and I got into it, CJ, and you're like, hey man, like not cool. That's a boundary of yours, right? So
Hmm.
I gotta respect that.
Yeah, and I guess it's a good way to kind of set the boundaries in a respectful way. Like you just said, hey man, not cool, leave me alone, right? Like,
Yeah, it
because
doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be like a formal template.
like nothing combative yet, you got to kind of lay it out there, which I think is important because in this day and age. But and this kind of brings me back to my other, well, a thought that I had, and interestingly enough, I just talked to a lawyer earlier who was talking about free speech, right? And how
Mhm.
important it is to have free speech, and how we should still be able to speak our minds, right? and
Yes.
not necessarily view everything as an aggression. And the reason why I bring that up is like even for myself, like sometimes I like to push boundaries with my friends and certain people, but my question now is just kind of like overall in this society, how do we go about kind of recognizing other people's boundaries? Because sometimes certain people aren't clear about it, right? And it's kind of, you mentioned you're an introvert as well, and I mean I'm very extroverted, so I'll say things off the cuff and not even think about it. But how would somebody like me kind of navigate through this world in regards to people's boundaries and just kind of learning to hone in on that skill?
I believe what you mentioned as far as, hey, sometimes I push those boundaries. Sometimes we just don't know where someone's boundaries are until they tell us or we get the nonverbal, okay, they didn't want that to be said or done. Okay. That
Hmm.
wasn't that wasn't that wasn't good for them or safe or whatever. So that's one way, but simply just having a conversation, which for man to man can often be quite uncomfortable. Like, hey man, what's your boundaries? It's just, it's really just asking like, hey, what's acceptable for you in this? Like, is there something you don't like with this situation? And then being able to have a conversation around what is safe, what can be permissible, what's okay for you to see with me,
Hmm.
is one way to do it. Uh, Sometimes it just comes up as a reaction, like, hey, yeah, I'm really frustrated that you're coming outside at 7:59 a.m. when I have to take you to work, and I have to
Hmm.
go to work, and we have like 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
could you please respect my time and yours?
Interesting, interesting. So that's
Yeah.
like dealing with the late wife.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Oh, it sounds like a common occurrence.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's really just being able to meet people where they're at and just
Hmm.
ask them as well, hey, what if you don't like the word boundaries, what is your preference with this? What is your limit with this? How much
Yeah.
maybe my limit's only 2 hours at this dinner with family and that's all I can take. Okay, good to know.
Interesting. And I guess, yeah, you mentioned family there too. I guess that's kind of like, because that's a tough nut to crack for anybody, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's probably the one that probably has the biggest ramifications, along with like the biggest ripples when it comes to just kind of dealing with that situation as a whole, I would imagine, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Family just love to encroach. Eh?
Yeah.
It's like a nutmeg. Nutmeg is so hard to crack, and so it often takes a lot of attempts, and maybe it's a continuous rehashing of this boundary. Yeah,
Interesting. So how do you go about dealing with that if it's like a toxic environment? Would you recommend if somebody just continuously just kind of encroaches upon your boundaries that you set, you laid out, you discussed it with this person, would it be wiser to just kind of take that person out of your life?
that's where consequences come in as part of boundaries, and the consequence could be very firm. And maybe the boundary changes when they change down the line,
Hmm.
because boundaries are meant to be flexible. Ultimatums are more so rigid. And so if they change, I can change as far as the boundary.
Interesting.
So yeah, so we call it a parentectomy if it's parents. Might have to cut a parent out of my life because they're toxic for me, at least right now.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. It might be extreme. Maybe it's only a call every now and then.
Hmm.
So that's sometimes what happens. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because it kind of seems like sometimes, regardless of who this person is in our lives, and usually it's not the people that just kind of say hi to at work and then you leave them at work. It's usually the people that kind of are the ones closest to you, because it seems like it happens more often than not in that scenario, right?
Yeah, but sure does. Yeah, the ones that are more in my face.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
nonstop just kind of like jibber jabbering, just I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I don't need your opinion. I don't really want it, but that's cool. Go on.
There's three types of people in this world, eh? There's crabs, turkeys, and eagles. The crabs are the ones that give their opinion, like you just said. The turkeys give their advice to us, which may or may not be beneficial, depending on
Mhm.
how we screen that from other people. That's good.
Mhm.
And then there's the eagles, which, yeah, they give us some wise counsel. I probably don't have to have stringent boundaries with them.
Yeah.
No.
But I think that's kind of the irony of life, is that the Eagles are far and few. And usually they don't like to
Yes.
talk.
I've never thought about it that way, that they're actually far and few and they don't like to speak, they actually listen more.
Yeah.
It's a very good, I'm gonna have to keep that. Yeah, that's a very good metaphor. Yeah.
Hey man, you brought it up because I'm like, it's funny because the crabs are always just there crawling around on the ground. It's like, oh, here you are again, right? Turkeys are just kind of waddling around. Sometimes they come around, whatever. But an eagle is like way up there, and then when he comes down, it's like, ooh, snap! He's gonna sit.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, oh, he took off, man. Are we gonna catch up to him? No.
This young man I'm working with right now, I think his word is spit when something's cool. And I'm like, all right, never heard that. I'm not 20, I'm
Yeah.
39. So okay, good to know. So that's spit when an eagle
Yeah,
swoops
yeah,
down.
yeah. Interesting. But no, it makes perfect sense. And it's one of those things. Wise counsel, I think, it's a rarity. And that's kind of why it's wise counsel, not mass appeal kind of counsel. And I think this generation, ironically enough, we got all the information all over the place, but we're starving for wise counsel. We're starving for wisdom. We see stupidity everywhere, which is unfortunate, but we need wise counsel more and more.
Yeah, stupidity is contagious, and Chat GPT is not doing any favors for the getting a quick answer, but it doesn't have that substance, that voice.
Yeah, that human feel to it. But
Yeah.
again, when it comes to like just getting people to heal and stuff, what is something that somebody could do right now that you would say is probably one of the most underrated thing in regards to men?
Self-compassion.
Ooh,
Mm.
why?
Men like to beat themselves up in many different ways, sometimes physically, sometimes a lot of times emotionally. Shame, guilt, remorse, regret. Oftentimes we think that if we have a positive view on negative self-criticism, it'll motivate us enough to get where we want to go.
Hmm.
However, it only goes so far, getting motivated by shame. And so I would say, I don't know if it's two words or one word, it's got a hyphen in it, but self-compassion. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, you're right because it's kind of like maybe maybe it's the way our brains are set up or something. Where you're right, I kind of see that. Even in my own life, where it just kind of makes more sense. It's like motivated by pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that personally. It doesn't mean that I give myself a free pass.
Hmm.
It just says, okay, I don't have to beat myself up. I can use that energy to reach out to others and find some other tools to help
Yeah.
me.
Interesting. 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 Because yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. So self-compassion would be probably the first step. What do you think would be best for most guys to do after they realize that, okay, I should probably stop beating myself up? What would be the second step?
Although self-compassion is an action in and of itself, then it's taking more agency.
Hmm.
That could be reaching out to people. That could be counseling if that's what's needed. Not everybody needs therapy, but if that's something that somebody needs, then they can go that route. Or it's finding some different support groups. It could be getting with a trainer or the coach,
Hmm.
and having a structured routine throughout the week is another big piece. Being able to work on motivation with different motivational skills, one step at a time. That's how you eat an elephant. So, it's, one piece at a time. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot to take in, but I think it makes perfect sense because you're right. It's almost, but I kind of feel like because I got a friend, right? And he's a smart dude, he works on investing and stuff. And he's like, and he sees all these courses that are out there, right? Like how to make 100 grand in the stock market, how to make 100 grand, right? And he's actually designing a course and it's called How to Make 10 Grand. And I'm
Nice. Okay.
like, man, why
Okay.
are you shooting so low? I'm like, you're doing a lot better than that. You're killing it. You're one of the people I look up to. And he's like, I think a lot of people just got to know where to start. Right. And I think what you mentioned there, it's kind of like that little kernel, that little seed that leads to everything else is where most guys, including myself, because it's something that I'm like, okay, like I never really explored that subject before the way that I probably should. But that one little seed, I think, is what can make a monumental difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I can break away that self-doubt on only being able to make 10,000, you know,
Hmm.
a month as far as teaching people. If I can start to cultivate maybe some compassion toward the self and action, dissolve that self-doubt. I can do more.
Mm-hmm.
I have the ability to do more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the small steps, man. Small
S-
steps is kind of the way to go.
Small steps indeed. Absolutely. Like when I was learning martial arts, I had a hard time between when we were doing like sparring,
Mm-hmm.
being altogether passive and altogether like aggressive. Like it's hard to find that sweet spot,
Balance, yeah.
balance. And looking back, I have to have self-compassion on my younger self. Like that was tough. It was tough to find that sweet spot.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that kind of goes back to what you opened up earlier, where you talked about, the different versions of ourselves, like the past, present, future. Do you, do you think that it's important for us to kind of go into our own minds and reevaluate, some of the situations we were in the past and just kind of have self-compassion on that version of ourselves as well?
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I have nothing else to emphasize other than yes, CJ. We can do that, even if it's been in the past, for the past version of us. Mhm.
Yeah. There's a lot of things. I mean, I even think about myself where I'm just like, oh God, I want to go back and just punch myself.
You can punch yourself with some self-compassion, eh? Like, yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
interesting. Because
yeah.
I mean, as you mentioned earlier on with the art therapy is just it seems like you've taken all these different concepts and embodied it and kind of made it just into one, right? And really taken all these different aspects that I think aren't explored enough, or maybe because I'm not well versed in psychology as yourself, but from what I hear and just kind of like the mainstream media and stuff, like a lot of the times we're just looking, it's almost like we're looking to put on band-aids, on the subject, and we're not really looking for that real healing, which is why I commend you. And that's why, I mean, I made this podcast anyways, well, like this entire podcast, because I'm looking for solutions. I'm looking for solutions for guys in regards to our health, right? And I think mental health is one of those that's super unexplored, underrated, and unfortunately affecting a lot of men, right? And I think what you're doing here is basically solving it with a concept that I don't think a lot of people, I don't think it's as big as it needs to be. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's not in the public eye as much for men. Yeah, and I do hope that men can see the importance of that. And as you mentioned, when we first started, suicide rates are climbing. Men will accomplish suicide a lot more than women
Hmm.
usually because of the means in which they do. And I remember working with a gentleman who did accomplish suicide and had my same first name, had a young child,
Oh, geez.
and the shame and the guilt that comes with that, as far as what could I have done more, I had to learn to have self-compassion on me. That I just did not, I just, I can't read people's minds. I can only do so much.
Hmm.
And I feel for his family. I feel for him and his son and everyone else. But I have to have some self-compassion for me.
Yeah, but I mean, from what I've gathered already, it's like you're very empathetic, man. And I think that's one thing that I would be looking for in a counselor is just somebody that has those skills to really pick up on other people's emotions. Because at the same time, though, I think that can affect you very deeply. Like, I mean, I commend you for your work, but I could not do it because that'd be horrible. Or I
Thank,
just
thank.
gotta be a little bit too extroverted. Like, no, man, you're fine, dude. Buck up.
Sometimes that's needed with motivation.
Yeah.
Uh, the way it's said, I appreciate the compliments, CJ. I do what I can. I try to be empathic with the people that I work with, and I try to give myself some empathy as well, which goes back into the topic we've been talking about.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
kind of that, man, because it's tough. It's tough, but at the same time, it's needed. And that's kind of where it's like, we're talking about passion and about what it is that you truly want to do with your life. And I think this is your calling, man. Like this is the purpose. Now you found yours, right? And
that's
I
right.
think it's awesome. But the one question that I want to ask before we end today is just what kind of impact do you want to make in the world with the therapy that you're doing right now?
A deep, positive, meaningful impact. Hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, I
Mhm.
think you're doing it, man. It's
Thanks,
just a
CJ.
matter of time. It's just a matter of time for it to become really, I think, more mainstream, I guess. And I think that over time, it's just going to start to grow because I really do feel like a lot of men that listen to this, and a lot of people just over time men in particular, we need to hear that. And I think that self-compassion part is pretty massive. you know.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Thanks. And it's it's waiting there for men to cultivate that
Mhm,
self-compassion. You know, they've been told a lot of us have been told growing up, only feel these emotions,
mhm.
or don't feel any emotions at all.
Better yet.
Better yet, yeah. And now we get to see maybe this is a phoenix rising from the ashes moment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're one of the guys that's leading that. So, again, tell us more. We can find you, Eric, and any website, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. And the links are always in the description. But go ahead and tell us as well, man.
Sure. So my website, www.recoveryartscounseling.com, and that's with two L's because we're in Canada. So for those that are listening in the States, LLING. And there's also Recovery Arts Counseling on Instagram, Recovery Arts Counseling on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, Eric Fisher,
Okay.
Fisher, Eric ERIC, and
Mhm.
also I'm on Facebook as well as Recovery Arts Counseling. So a few
Nice.
places. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, today was a blast, Eric. And honestly, I commend you for your work. And I'm very happy that you came on the show and shared your knowledge, man. And to
Thank you so
anybody
much.
listening that may be suffering in silence, hey, be sure to reach out, man. What doesn't hurt?
Thank you so much, CJ, for the time.
Hey, thank you for coming on. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.